Are the LA Kings still a playoff team? We discuss that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We would love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, if you have listened to this show for any length of time, if you're an everydayer, I hope you know that by nature, I'm an optimist. I look on the bright side of things most of the time. And I don't want this show to be negative, but you have to keep it real. And do people still say that anymore? Probably not. But the point is, it has not been a great offseason for the LA Kings. And it's hard for Kings fans right now to be totally optimistic about next season. Now, that doesn't mean we know what's going to happen. Of course not, because we if we knew that, we'd all be rich and living in Las Vegas. It's one of the great things about sports. You don't know what's going to happen. You think you know, and maybe you're right a lot of the time if you're really knowledgeable, but there's always surprises. There's always things that catch us off guard. Look, I supposedly know something about hockey. Last year, going into the season, I thought the New Jersey Devils were going to win the Stanley Cup. They missed the playoffs, and I predicted the Florida Panthers would miss the playoffs, and they won the Stanley Cup. So preseason predictions are not worth a lot. That said, do you think the LA Kings are a playoff team next season? I did happen to see an article online earlier today on it was on Monday actually, and I have linked it on our X and Twitter account if you want to read the entire article. And it was done by somebody that I actually know. His name is Matt Larkin. He used to be with the Hockey News, and now he is one of the top writers over at Daily Faceoff. And it's an article that you will probably see a few different times, written by a few different people between now and the start of next season. And he was the first person I saw do it so far. And it was one of those articles about teams that missed the playoffs last season that could make the playoffs this season, and teams that made the playoffs last season that could miss the playoffs this coming season. And I saw the title of the article and I said, the Kings are going to be on that list. And sure enough, they were the first team listed as teams that made the playoffs last year and could miss the playoffs this coming season. And I have to admit, my first impression was, yeah, I could see that. So if you want to check out the whole article, like I said, and you follow us on social media, I did link it. But I do want to read the final couple sentences from the article. And Matt Larkin says, quote, the Kings are worse in net, worse offensively, and worse defensively than they were a year ago. Even if exciting young forward Quinton Byfield takes another step forward, it won't offset how badly Rob Blake has struck out this offseason. The Kings are in real danger of missing the playoffs, end quote. And like I said, I'll admit, at first glance, after I read that, I thought, yep, I think he's right on all counts. But is he right? Do you agree or disagree? So, kind of like with the Joel Edmondson contract, I decided to not just think he's right and, kind of off the cuff be like, yeah, I think he's right. Actually look into it a little bit. Do a little research, do a little bit of a deep dive and see if he's right. So the first thing he said was the Kings are worse off in net. Well, is that true? Well, based on stats of Darcy Kemper against Cam Talbot from a season ago, sure. It seems like an easy case to make. Cam Talbot was 27, 20, and 6. Darcy Kemper was 13, 14, and 3. Cam Talbot was an all-star. He finished in the top 10 in save percentage with .913 and a goals against average at .250. Kemper wasn't an all-star, and he had a save percentage below .900 at .890 and a goals against average of over 3 at 3.31. However, what was Cam Talbot's stats the year before he joined the Kings? With Ottawa, the season before, Cam Talbot had a record of just above 500, 17, 14, and 2. His save percentage was under 900 at 898, and his goals against average was close to 3 at 2.93. So the change of scenery could definitely be something to be optimistic about when it comes to Darcy Kemper. Will he be a top 10 goalie in save percentage and goals against average? I'm not sure about that, but I actually feel pretty confident that his goals against average can be under 3 and his save percentage can be around 900 with the Kings. We saw that with Cam Talbot. It makes a big difference when you play on a team that is structurally sound defensively. So are the Kings worse in net or not? Again, I think it's easy to make the case that they are, but I do think the Kings can do with Darcy Kemper what they did with Cam Talbot. They can win with him, not necessarily because of him. So I'm not completely convinced that the Kings are worse in net. If they are worse, I don't think it's much worse. And if it is much worse, then they still have David Rittich, who they could turn to, who did prove last year when called upon, he can do a pretty solid job. So on the surface, are the Kings worse in net? I would say maybe slightly, but I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's an open shut case like it might seem. How about, are the Kings worse offensively? At first glance, again, you would say yes, but then you look at what the Kings lost and you look at the numbers they've lost and you're like, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not so bad after all. Now, the biggest loss was Pierre-Luc Dubois, but was that really a loss? You also lost Victor Arvidsson, Blake Lizotte, and Carl Grundstrom out of the forward group. So Dubois statistically was the biggest subtraction, 16 goals and 40 points out of the Kings lineup. But it does feel like he is an addition by subtraction. The distraction of PLD is now gone. The numbers are not that much to replace. Victor Arvidsson was hurt most of last season. And if you're talking from a pure production standpoint, the Kings only lost 6 goals and 15 points from him a year ago. Now, you can argue that, and you wouldn't be wrong, that when Victor Arvidsson is healthy, he's capable of putting up 20 plus goals and 50 plus points. But we're not talking about what the Kings potentially lost. We're talking about what they actually lost from last season, and that was 6 goals and 15 points. That's something you can replace. Blake Lizotte and Carl Grundstrom combined for 15 goals and 27 points. So when you add it all up, and granted, math is not my strong suit, the Kings have lost 37 goals and 82 points. Now, what did the Kings add to their forward group this offseason? Well, they added Warren Foegele and Tanner Jeannot. Foegele had 20 goals and 41 points, and Jeannot had 7 goals and 14 points. When you subtract their totals in goals and points from the total that the Kings lost with PLD, RB, Lizzo, and Grundstrom, the Kings are looking to replace 10 goals and 27 points. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel pretty confident that Alex Turcotte and Akil Thomas and maybe Samuel Fagemo can combine to replace 10 goals and 27 points. So again, just looking at the numbers and what the Kings lost and what the Kings added, I think the Kings actually may score more goals and have more points from the group that comes in over the group that departed. So again, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Victor Arvidsson, Blake Lizotte, Carl Grundstrom, they're all gone. But what the Kings are replacing them with and the production they had, which wasn't off the charts, I actually don't agree that the Kings are worse offensively. Now, are the Kings worse defensively? Matt Roy's gone, and Andreas Englund is going to be replaced in the lineup by Joel Edmondson. Now, is Edmondson an upgrade over Englund? I think so, slightly. We'll have to wait and see. But how much of an upgrade, we're not sure. We'll have to wait and see. Matt Roy being replaced by essentially Brandt Clarke. Now, again, Brandt Clarke is going to score more points than Matt Roy. Roy had 5 goals and 25 points. I have a lot of confidence that Brandt Clarke is going to score more than 5 goals and 25 points next season if he plays the full season. So, but we're not talking about offense. We're talking about defense. And there's no way Brandt Clarke or Jordan Spence are on par defensively with Matt Roy. So again, even if Edmondson is a slight upgrade over Engelland, it's hard to say that Brant Clark, likely going into his first full NHL season, is going to be on par defensively with Matt Roy, or Jordan Spence filling Matt Roy's shoes in his second NHL season is going to be as good defensively as Matt Roy. So to the question, are the Kings worse defensively? I think you would have to say, yeah, they probably are worse defensively. Now, let me be clear about one thing. As a Kings fan, I'm not trying to spin that I'm happy with what the Kings did this offseason, because I'm not. I don't think they're better than they were a year ago, but that's not the question. The question is, are the Kings worse? Are the Kings not going to be a playoff team this year? And look, I can honestly see both sides of the argument, but after looking at it a bit closer, I'm not convinced that the answer, are the Kings worse, is definitely yes. My gut tells me that they could be about the same. And as far as them being a playoff team, I think they're on the bubble. I think it wouldn't be shocking if they made it in as a wild card or maybe the third seed in the Pacific like they were a year ago. But it also wouldn't shock me as well if they came up short and didn't make it into the playoffs. So whether the Kings are worse or not is up for debate. There's certainly evidence on both sides of things. But what about them making the playoffs? That's not entirely in their hands. We will look at the teams they have to compete against for a playoff spot next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I have used Gametime to buy tickets to NFL, college football, and NHL games, and I am a very satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and navigate. Just go tap on the listings for sports, music, shows, and they will list the tickets and the best deals. It's easy to search for tickets for teams and events, and you get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I think based on what the Kings lost this offseason and what they've added, I kind of feel like they're a bubble team. It could go either way. And certainly how the Kings get off to a good start under a new head coach could be a key as well. How the young guys develop, certainly a key as well. Health is always a key. But it also is going to depend on what are the other teams doing around the NHL. How have they improved? The teams that the Kings are going head-to-head against in the Western Conference and specifically in the Pacific Division. Now, we know it is very unlikely that these same 8 teams that made the playoffs last season will be the same 8 teams that make the playoffs this season. There are typically 2 or 3 teams that fall out of a playoff spot and 2 or 3 teams that move in. Last season out of the West, you had the Stars, Jets, Canucks, Avalanche, Oilers, Predators, Kings, and Golden Knights that made the playoffs. The Blues, Wild, Flames, Kraken, Coyotes, Ducks, Blackhawks, and Sharks did not. So let's start by looking at the Pacific Division. Top 3 teams that made it in last season: Canucks, Oilers, and Golden Knights. And I guess or I should say the Canucks, Oilers, and Kings, and the Golden Knights were, of course, the wild card team. Now, of the teams that made it in last season out of the Pacific, I feel confident the Oilers and Canucks are going to be back in the playoffs. Edmonton, I think, is probably the favorite. Their core is still intact. Yes, Leon Draisaitl is a pending UFA, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they navigate that. But again, the Oilers have all their core pieces back. They made a couple of additions, Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner, and didn't really lose anyone of note. And I think that they're ready, unfortunately, to take another run at the Stanley Cup. As for the team that was the division champs last year, the Vancouver Canucks, they added Jake DeBrusk in the offseason. They did lose Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm, a couple of late additions at the trade deadline that they could not retain, but they still have their core: Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, JT Miller, Brock Besser, Thatcher Demko. So I can't see the Canucks finishing any lower than second. They could win the division again, but to me, it's a 2-team race in the Pacific. It's either the Oilers or the Canucks finishing first or second. It's one of those 2 teams. I feel pretty confident about that. Of the remaining 6 teams, who is likely not to be a playoff team? Well, the Sharks are improved. They got some good young talent. They added the number 1 overall pick in the draft in Macklin Celebrini. They brought in a guy like Tyler Toffoli. That said, even if they are a bit better, they were still the worst team in the NHL last season. So I think they'll be more competitive, but they're still not close to being a playoff team. Same goes for the Ducks. They didn't add anyone this offseason. They're continuing their slow rebuild with draft picks. At some point, maybe it pays off for them, but it ain't going to be next season. So again, the Oilers and Canucks, I think, are the top 2, and I feel pretty confident the Sharks and Ducks are the bottom 2 in the Pacific Division. So that leaves 4 teams battling for third place and potentially a wild card spot. The Kings are certainly in there, as are the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas, though, suffered some big losses and didn't really add anyone. They lost former Conn Smythe Trophy winner and original Golden Knight, Jonathan Marchessault. I think that is a huge loss for them on and off the ice. He was an important member of that team. I think it sends a pretty bad message that a guy like that is someone you weren't looking to retain. I know he was going to be costly, but that's a guy you want to invest in, to me. And they didn't. They let him go. So they also lost depth forward Chandler Stevenson. So Vegas did retain a couple of guys they picked up at the deadline, Tomas Hertl and Noah Hannafin. But the Golden Knights, they are not as good as they were last season. Question is, how much worse are they? They were the last wildcard team out of the Pacific. Are they out of the playoffs worse? I'm not sure about that. I think they are definitely in the mix again, along with the Kings, for that third spot and a potential wildcard spot. I think the Seattle Kraken are going to bounce back and be in contention for a playoff spot. They made a couple of nice additions this offseason. Chandler Stevenson they brought in. They also got defenseman Brandon Montour from the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. And they got a new coach in former King Dan Bylsma, who's had a ton of success in the AHL recently and was a former Stanley Cup winner in Pittsburgh as a coach. And I think he's going to inject some life into this team. And I think the Kraken are going to bounce back. Doesn't mean they're going to be a playoff team, but I think they're going to be in the hunt with the Kings and the Golden Knights as well. And then the final team is the Calgary Flames. They traded away their number 1 goalie, Jacob Markstrom. They really didn't add anyone of significance. They're in a rebuild as well. They're not quite as far down as the Ducks and Sharks, but I don't see them being in that group along with Seattle, LA, and Vegas as well, competing for a playoff spot. I think the Calgary Flames are in a very solid 6th spot in the Pacific Division. So that leaves the Kings and the Golden Knights and the Kraken, in my opinion, the 3 teams that will be battling for the third spot for the automatic playoff spot in the Pacific and potentially a wild card spot as well. So that's the way I'm looking at it. I think the Kings are right there, but it's going to be competition there from Vegas and from Seattle. Now, if the Kings end up battling for a wild card spot, that obviously brings the Central Division into the conversation. I think they have a very clear top 3 in Dallas, Colorado, and the much improved Nashville Predators. So Winnipeg was in the top 3 last year. I think they're going to be battling for a wild card spot this year. So if the Kings are in the wild card, that's another team they'll be battling against in Winnipeg. St. Louis and Minnesota, they could be in the mix. I see Utah and Chicago still being outside of the playoff picture. So again, if the Kings are in the wild card hunt, I think they're going to be in competition against Winnipeg and maybe along with Seattle and Vegas as well. So it's going to be tight. It's just like it was last year, frankly. But I think the Kings are in the hunt, but there's going to be some stiff competition to either get that third spot in the Pacific or a wild card spot for the LA Kings next season if they can make the playoffs once again. And then once they get in the playoffs, well, that's another conversation, but you can't win a playoff series if you don't get in. So hopefully the Kings are going to be right there again. There is a rumor about the Kings adding another team's captain. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with FanDuel, the sports keep going whenever I want them. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. Major League Baseball, golf, soccer, NASCAR. It's also never too early to get some bets down on your favorite NFL teams for the upcoming season. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sports betting is not yet legal in California. However, you can still sign up at FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds, your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action from anywhere with their free games featuring real cash prizes. No matter where you are in the Golden State, there are plenty of options to back the underdog or the favorite once sports betting becomes available. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So one thing I try to do to keep up to date on anything going on with the LA Kings is to go to Google, type in LA Kings, hit enter, and then click on news, and it'll list a bunch of news articles involving the LA Kings. Now, most of it is stuff that I already know about, but every once in a while, something will pop up that will get my attention. And that was the case earlier today with a couple of articles I saw from the hockey news. One in particular came out earlier today. You may have saw it, you may not have saw it, but the article was titled, "Could the Kings be suitors for the Rangers' Jacob Trouba?" Now, the author speculated that Trouba could be a replacement for Matt Roy. Now, if the Kings are looking to get bigger and stronger, Jacob Trouba would fit the bill. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's 6'3", 200 pounds, is probably the most feared hitter in the NHL. His big blasts are frequently shown on the highlight shows, and he's been the captain of the Rangers and is a right shot defenseman. He won the Mark Messier Leadership Award this past year, for what that's worth. Problem is, he's not that good at defense. More specifically, he's pretty slow, and his hockey IQ, well, it's not exactly his strong suit. He was relegated to the Rangers' bottom pairing once the playoffs came around for New York. Oh, by the way, he makes $8 million per season for the next 2 seasons, and the Rangers are desperate to shed themselves of a horrible contract. Sounds familiar. Now, it was suggested the Kings would ask the Rangers to retain some of his salary. Do you think? And the Rangers would get Arthur Kaliev and multiple draft picks in return for Jacob Trouba. Odd that the article made no mention whatsoever of Brandt Clark. There was also this pretty amusing nugget at the end of the article that said, quote, "Kings GM Rob Blake will need to work some of his magic to get a deal across the finish line," end quote. His magic. What kind of magic is that? I think a lot of Kings fans would like to see him use a magic trick on himself to disappear. But if you wanted the Kings offseason to go from bad to worse, have the Kings trade for Jacob Trouba. I do not want to do a show talking about the Kings trade for Jacob Trouba. I think the article was more clickbait than anything, but hey, it got me to click, got me to read. So good on them for getting that done. There were a couple other hockey news articles I saw from earlier in the week. One of them involving the Kings trading for Nashville Predators young standout goalie Yaroslav Askarov. Although the article never speculated on what Nashville would ask for in return, which I would guess would be quite a bit for a goalie who was supposedly the top goalie prospect in all of hockey. What would the Kings be willing? We had an email asking about this possibility, and the price tag I think would be very big for the Kings to. And then look, we know the Kings potentially, not potentially, they're still trying to figure out the long-term solution in net. Is it Eric Bortillo? Could it down the road be Carter George or somebody else? Who knows? But I just don't see this as a possibility for the Kings. They would have to give up a lot. And now, honestly, I have questions about Askarov, because why are the Nashville Predators not looking to get rid of UC Saros and bring up a younger, cheaper, but supposedly next hot goalie in the NHL? Instead, they signed Saros to a huge extension. So maybe they're not sold on him. Maybe that is an indication that maybe this guy isn't everything that he's been built up to be. Either way, the Kings should not be looking to bring in this young goalie, just because I think the price is way too high. Are they going to give up multiple first-round picks and who knows, other pieces too? I would say no to that. And there was one other article that I actually think there's some pretty serious possibilities in. And that was the Kings trading Arthur Kaliev to the Toronto Maple Leafs for forward Nick Robertson. Now, this makes a lot of sense. They're both 20-something forwards. Kaliev's 23, Robertson's 22. Both restricted free agents who have asked to be traded. So both disgruntled, both looking for a change of scenery, looking for a better situation. If you don't know, Nick Robertson is the younger brother of Dallas Stars standout. Nick Robertson And the Dallas Stars is Jason Robertson. Sorry about that. Total brain fart on my part. Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars. They both have California roots, so there's that. Robertson's coming off a 3-year deal that paid him just over $800,000 a year. He is a restricted free agent, so they have to sign him. 14 goals, 37 points in 54 games last season in Toronto for a young guy who's probably going to get better. And this is a deal I'd actually like to see get done. I think it makes a lot of sense. They're similar players, both looking for a new place to play. And I actually liked that article. I think that is something to keep an eye out on if you're an LA Kings fan. I don't think that was just clickbait. I think that's something that might have some merit to it. All right. For you everydayers, those of you who listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday, Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News, who covers the LA Kings, will join us to give his thoughts on the Kings offseason so far. And on Friday, as always, we'll have another Kings fan feedback show. Anything that's on your mind about our LA Kings. This is your chance to sound off or ask questions. The email address to get in on that, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments on the YouTube episodes as well. And we'd love you to stay interactive with the show on social media. You can follow us on X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.